Not every story about endangered species ends in tragedy. The green sea turtle, once on the brink of collapse, has rebounded thanks to decades of protection and conservation. But while the turtle shows us what's possible, the latest IUCN Red List update warns that Arctic seals and more than half of the world's birds are sliding deeper into trouble. The question is, will we let our most vulnerable species fade away, or will we choose to follow the turtle's example of recovery? That's what we're going to talk about in today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the species that were endangered, just like the green sea turtle. But first, I want to talk about something that I remember every time I talk about sea turtles. And that's the time where my daughter, who is now 16 years old, I can't even believe that, but when she was 9 months old, 10 months old, we went to Florida as a family. And, you know, she's younger, so she was in a crib beside her. We were in a hotel, and it was an all-in-one room. So my older daughter was sleeping. She was about 2. My wife was sleeping, and my youngest daughter got up, right? So she was, 10 months old. She gets up. It's around 6 o'clock in the morning. It's a little early. I want my wife and my other daughter to sleep. So I take her down, and I go downstairs. I get her ready. We go downstairs. We go to the beach, and we watch the sunrise together. A nice little moment between my daughter and I looking at nature. She's having a great time. We're running around on the beach before the beach sand gets too hot, and we just sit there. I put her on my lap and we watch the sunrise. As we see the sunrise, what was revealed in front of us was unreal. It was this mound of sand. And I knew exactly what it was when I first saw it. I started to tell Jade, my youngest daughter, I was like, hey, look at this mound. And she thought it was like a little sandcastle, but I'm like, no, it's not a sandcastle. It's this mound. It's sea turtles. There are sea turtle eggs underneath this mound. And when I looked up and we got up, and we didn't go near it. We stayed our distance because you're not supposed to go near a mound like that, a sea turtle nest. But we looked at the tracks going up and down, like up to the mound and then back down to the ocean. It was like perfect unison. It was like straight line. It was actually quite beautiful as we see the sunrise. So I go upstairs after the sunrise, and we go to the lobby first. We tell them that there's a sea turtle nest that's right there, and then we got to share that opportunity. And they called Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife is in Florida, and they kind of marked it off because it was a public beach and they didn't want anybody to step on it. They didn't want anybody to ruin it. So I tell my oldest daughter, who's like now going to university, in her first year university for wildlife and conservation, which is awesome, a wildlife biology and conservation program. She comes down and I tell her what I saw and we show her what we saw. And so she's going around, like there's a barricade around the mound, and she's going around the mound picking up any type of garbage. And she's like, Dad, can we pick this up? Dad, can we pick this up? Can we pick this up? So we're picking it up. We're putting it in the garbage. I wouldn't let my daughter touch the garbage because, 2-year-old, dirty hands. We don't want that. But anyway, so we shared that experience, taking care of these sea turtles. And she was asking questions, and both of them, they were really, really interested in it. Now, of course, my 10-month-old, she probably kind of forgot about it, but we got to share that experience. And that was like this personal thing. This was, almost 16 years ago. At that moment where these sea turtles, I didn't know what species it was, but these sea turtles, like green sea turtles, come on that beach, and you start to think they may not be here one day. They're endangered of going extinct. Like all 7 species at one point were endangered of going extinct. There are a lot of people who are doing some phenomenal work in conservation and research and tagging to find out where these turtles go, making sure they're protected at every point in their journey. There are a lot of laws to protect these sea turtles. And it was just wonderful to see this experience that we've had. And now, like 16 years later, to see that the population of one species has rebounded, and now they're getting delisted as endangered and going to least vulnerable, which is great news. Now, of course, it comes with some caveats. When you start to delist in specific areas like countries, I remember telling like a species at risk biologist when I worked for the government in Canada, they were saying, hey, yeah, one thing you have to be careful when you delist a species is that there are certain laws or certain reports and monitoring that also go with that. So, when you're an endangered species on the species at risk list or an endangered species list in a specific country, there are specific protections that go with it, but there's also things that you have to do to report on it. You have to evaluate the population. You have to come up with recovery plans. You have to monitor the species. You have to do all these things. There's extra money that goes into doing the research, to doing projects, and to make sure that it's conserved and make sure the area around it is protected, as long as the governments don't strip that away. And we saw that with the manatees, right? The manatees back in the 1950s, 1960s went down to about 600 manatees in Florida, and then they rebounded over like 3 or 4 decades because there were all these, recovery plans and monitoring plans, and they went up to about just over 6,000 individuals. Well, now they got delisted. There's less monitoring plans and less focus on their protection. And the water quality has kind of gone to hell in Florida. And so we're seeing less seagrasses. And what do these manatees eat? They eat seagrasses. And so we're starting to see less manatees, a lot of die-offs, a lot of bad water quality that had like acute die-offs. So like right away they died off for a number of different individuals, not only manatees, but dolphins and sharks and fish and all that kind of stuff. So we have some problems with the manatees now, and there's probably going to have to go back on the list. But once you take them off the list, it's really hard to put back on the list. So scientists and managers make sure that when a species is listed as endangered, it's very difficult to take them off because it's very difficult to put them back on. So they make sure that if they're delisted, it's fine. In the case of the manatees, that was more of a political thing that happened, which, scientists were already concerned about. And so now we're in a problem with manatees decreasing in population because of bad water quality, less seagrass, and so forth. And that's a big problem. But we saw a recovery in this population of green sea turtles, or in the species of green sea turtles in specific areas, which is great to see. So happy to see that that's happening. And now we move on to the bad news, where we saw seals and climate pressure that have taken a hit. So harp, hooded, and bearded seals in the Arctic have moved into higher risk categories. So their survival depends on sea ice. They need sea ice to rest, they need sea ice to eat. When the sea ice is vanishing faster than we predicted because of climate change, which I just talked in the last episode, we were talking more about coral reefs, but there's other species like polar bears and seals in the Arctic that depend on sea ice. When you don't have sea ice, you are at risk of dying more, and you have a risk of not being able to survive, and so you end up losing populations, right? Losing individuals and populations. So when you have no ground beneath your paws and you are an air breather and you're swimming the whole time, at some point you have to rest. That's why polar bears, although they can swim really long distances, 200, 400 kilometers, I think the longest was 700 kilometers, they still need to rest. They still need to rest on the ice. And same with seals, they're air breathers, they need to rest on the ice, maybe feed on the ice or bask in the sun, just be able to rest. If they can't do that on the sea ice because it's not there, floating sea ice, then they will die. That's really what happens. They will drown and they will die. And we're starting to see that more and more because there's less sea ice. And we're seeing it with polar bears. We're seeing it with other marine mammals like bearded, harp, and hooded seals in the Arctic that's happening. And that's obviously not a good thing. So more protection needs to be done there, but the protection needs to be like, we need to keep the sea ice around. Now, of course, let's move over to the birds. Now, 61% of bird species globally are declining. That's more than half, 61%. Basically, the threats are deforestation. So a lot of forests like Indonesia, Amazon, in Canada, like we're starting to see a lot of deforestation, whether it's deforestation because of direct humans or indirect, like climate change and wildfires. We're starting to see a lot of deforestation, which we all know are habitats for a lot of the birds. Agriculture is increasing usually because of deforestation. Invasive species are coming in and they're messing around with the food webs and the available resources for these birds to not only be protected, but also to feed. And then of course there's climate change. Climate change is changing wind patterns. It's making things hotter. It's causing wildfires, which leads to deforestation. It just makes everything worse. And so when we start to see that, it becomes worse. Then you got like the human side of it. Obviously, I mentioned deforestation, agriculture, invasive species usually by humans and human-related activities. But you also have like these migratory areas. So birds migrate. A lot of birds migrate really long distances. But during that migration, they need to stop over and rest and feed to get the energy to continue on with their long migrations. I'm going to think in Canada because I'm in Canada. Birds that migrate from the Arctic all the way down to the south of like, say, the United States or even in Mexico, they have to stop over at certain areas. And, they travel in wind tunnels because it's easier to travel when the wind is at your back, and they land in those areas. Well, when those areas are not available because of destruction practices or, development, or maybe even sometimes renewable energy areas that are impacted because that's where the wind is. So they'll put windmills in there. That can impact a population if it's not designated in the right spot or located in the right spot. It becomes a big problem when we talk about migratory spaces. So the lack of migratory stopovers, tropical birds losing forests, like we're starting to see these areas be impacted and these birds be impacted. Now we're down to 61% of birds species, globally that are declining. Not a good thing. You have a great success story in the sea turtles, the green sea turtles. You have a declining story with harp, hooded, and bearded seals in the Arctic because of lack of sea ice. And then, of course, 61% of species are declining globally. That's declining. That's not a good story. So although you're going to see a lot of highlights, you're going to see a lot of people talk about how green sea turtles have been, sort of delisted to one category, which is great. Is a testament to a lot of people working really, really hard and putting a lot of money and effort into those protections and making sure that the population is not only stabilized, but it's gotten bigger, which is great. We still have a lot of problems on this earth. And so, looking at the new IUCN Red List of endangered species and how that's changed, that's great, but there's also been a lot of impact on more species, right? WWF Canada just released a report on a lot of the species within Canada that have been declining, a majority of them. So obviously that's not good. So we're starting to see that. And a lot of it is human inflicted. A lot of it is because whether it's direct or indirect, it's loss of habitat, loss of sea ice, loss of resources. It's not really that great. In Ontario, on land, the government is taking away from anything on the endangered species at risk list and on the province, they're actually taking away the protections of the habitat of these species. So normally when you protect the species, you want to protect their habitat. But no, they're not protecting the habitat. They're protecting where they get their food, but they're not protecting the habitat where they live, where they nest, where they actually, sit and be comfortable and be safe from predators and so forth. They don't want to protect that. They're actually trying to change that law if haven't done it already. Governments that are changing these laws for development or changing these laws for whatever reason of oil and gas development, whatever that might be, we need to get those guys out of there. Right? We need to get those politicians out of there. We need to put politicians that are making sense of like, hey, you know what? We can actually be economically sound as well as environmentally sound. Like those two can go hand in hand. I think it's really important. Climate change, habitat loss, exploitation of human-driven problems, those are things that we need to get in control. And to get into control, you need to make sure that we are doing our part. Go vote for environmentally focused politicians. Make sure that when you speak to the candidates that come around your area, be like, what are you doing for the environment? What are you actually doing for the environment? And if they give you this BS that climate change isn't here, or it's not true, or it's being overblown in proportion, start to look at some of these reports. Show them some of these reports and be like, look, I'm seeing headlines all the time. And it's not leftist news or extremist news. These are environmental reports by scientists who are paid to do the work that they do and understand the trends in populations and so forth. If they don't understand that, if they can't understand or they try and spin it a different way, then that means they are corrupt. That means they don't care about the environment. You need to put in politicians that care about the environment. Care about the economy too, but care about the environment for heaven's sake. Like Christ, like we got to be able to do something. You're looking at declines is widespread, but recovery is possible. It's something that we really need to focus on. You really need to understand that you who's listening to this, you're not powerless. There's citizen science. There's policy advocacy. There's supporting organizations who are working with like animals like green sea turtle populations and local communities that are actually doing it right to say, hey, you know what? We want to increase the populations of these species because we know that they're declining quite rapidly and we want to help. Those are the organizations that help those communities or help bolster those populations in different ways by doing different studies, even academically, like in academia, like the researchers and the graduate students, all the people who have put together ways to do restoration or make sure that we're increasing restoration, like Project Seagrass, they're all good friends of mine, so I'm a little biased when it comes to that, but they've done a great thing to take a small organization and have a big impact and bring people together, not to take credit for other people's work, but bring people together, identify what's missing within sort of the research industry and be like, hey, we can put that together and we'll make sure we drive these types of projects as a collaborator. And I think that's just really great to see organizations like that, and we should be supporting organizations who do restoration, focus on projects, focus on ways that we can collaborate with others, put on symposiums. These are huge, huge things. So like the green sea turtle survival wasn't an accident. The resurgent in that survival wasn't an accident. It was a choice. It was a choice that we made to make sure, like as a collective, not only just me as a scientist who's speaking out for them, but as the people who are on the ground, the people who are working with communities, those communities that are making changes in their lives to make sure that they're not poaching eggs and they're not eating sea turtle eggs or sea turtles, and they're starting to use sea turtles as a way of driving ecotourism or as a way of making sure that there are marine protected areas at certain times when sea turtles are there and that nobody harms them. They do their own sort of management and enforcement, and it's great to see. So there's a lot of great things that come out, but we still have so many species that we need to save, and we need to choose to save that. And the way we choose is to vote, support organizations. Policy advocacy is huge, and a change in consumption habits is even bigger. that's where we're going to end it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think it's a great thing? How do you think we should manage the other endangered species or even just ecosystems? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio on your favorite podcast app, which I love, by the way, that's how I started. You're always going to get audio only from me. It's going to be great. I'd like you to hit me up on Instagram, DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode. And of course, you can also go to speakupforblue.com/contact to fill out the form, email me, and let me know your thoughts. Love to hear it. That's it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for supporting this podcast to the level that it has on YouTube. We've actually gotten to the first level of monetization, which opens up a lot of cool things that I'm working on right now to, continue with this community. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm just looking through strategies right now, but I can't wait to reveal it for you. So that was you. That was because of you guys being able to listen, being able to subscribe, to watch each and every episode. It's really important to me, and it means a lot to me. So thank you very much for listening. You have been listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.